All right. Thank you very much, Amy. So we welcome you. See that we've got folks from England and Iceland and several countries. So this is a tremendous output and a tremendous amount of people from different places. So welcome into part 2 of a Freedom First approach to fostering self-determination in babies and young children with blindness and visual impairment. So we will start our time today with our intros and objectives. We, of course, will do part 2 of the webinar today. Part 1 was last week. There is a recording of it, and you can access it. That link will be put in the chat at some point, so you know how to access that one. And also the second one once it comes out. I'll just announce it since folks are asking about the code. It's fostering, Fostering. Fostering is the code to begin today. There you go. There's the link for how to get this one and the last one, of course. We do have closed captioning, as you know, as well. Now, let's talk about a product that's available from APH called the Sunu Band. You may have heard about it, perhaps not. We just had a recent evening webinar, very successful one with the guys from the Sunu Band, Sunu Inc. They were on, talked about their product, which is a smart mobility wristband and also a smartwatch, giving you tactile feedback for the time, giving you information about obstacles and letting you know those types of things. The price is $299. It is a product we call APH Innovations, which means it's not a quota product, but it is available from us. It includes the wristband, of course, a charging cable, a quick start guide, and there is an updated Sunu app that if you're familiar with the older one, the newer one has a lot of features that make it independent of the band. Of course, it works fantastic together with the band, but it will give you quite a bit of information even without the band. So it's an outstanding product, and feel free to take a look at it on our website. Now, let's look at our objectives today. There are 2, and the first one, we're going to learn at least 3 perception-based principles that support activation of brain mechanism, which foster self-determined freedom and achievement in young children and across the lifespan. Most of last week covered that. There'll be some coverage of that today, but the first session certainly covered that in more detail. Today, we'll focus more on the second objective, which folks are going to learn 3 concrete strategies for fostering development of the 4 major brain processes. That's perceiving, acting, thinking, and socializing.
And Paul, if I could just interject really quick about the objectives, I failed to do one piece of housekeeping that goes in with the objectives.
Sure.
We had some really great questions that were given in our part 1 last week. We didn't have a chance to get to everything. So what I'm doing is I'm dropping in the chat box right now is a link. It's a link that is to Q&A for session 1. We compiled all of the questions that were not able to be addressed and gave it over to our presenter, and he offered the answers and his responses. So we want to make sure that you have access to that Q&A that we are dropping in the chat.
Okay, wonderful, because there were a ton of questions last time, and I'm sure there will be this time as well. So let's introduce Daniel, who is president of Visioneers, which is part of World Access for the Blind, an author, a certified orientation and mobility specialist. And of course, there's at Daniel Kish, WAFTB, if I can, which is his Twitter. And let's go ahead and let Daniel get started.
Good to be back for part 2. a lot more people for part 2. And some of the material that was covered in part 1 will be referenced in part 2. When the recording of part 1 goes up, I think you'll have access to that, and you'll be given that link to reference part 1. Part 1 was a bit more theoretical, but it does support part 2, which is a bit more practical. There's a lot of material to cover today, and so I may not get to many questions or any questions, but as before, I'm willing to take questions in writing, and I'm willing to write a response back. I'm also willing to take questions by email. I don't know if you guys have put my email address up or made that available, but it's just daniel-kish@worldaccessfortheblind.org. And you can reach me that way with any questions, but I'm happy to respond by email to questions if I don't get to them today. Also, if you didn't have a chance to review the video material, I will be making reference to that video material today. If you didn't get to it, I do encourage you to do it, if for no other reason than the sheer entertainment value of it, or much of it. You know, I think that if you're able to reference the material even after the course, that the material, that the content presented in this course will make more sense. I will also be jumping around a little bit because I'm going to prioritize the outline that I gave to everyone a little bit differently, because I want to make sure to get to, well, just a better flow of material. So, all right, so I think I'm going to jump straight into the echolocation piece and the 4 components of perceptual development training that is applicable to tactile training, cane training, and hearing. And particularly with respect to FlashSonar and echolocation. So actually, before I get to that, I want to talk a little bit about the echo signal. So a little bit about the click. I did talk last session about the differences between passive and active echolocation, or at least I alluded to it. Real quickly, passive is you're not using your own signal to elicit echoes from the environment. And with active echolocation, you are. The advantages to active echolocation are simply that you have control over the signal that you emit, and therefore you have control over the clarity of image that you receive. With passive echolocation, you're just kind of dealing with any old sound in the environment, most of which are not conducive, most of which are useful, but not necessarily conducive to eliciting the strongest images. And so active echolocation gives you the ability to produce a signal that is conducive to soliciting the best images. A good analogy for that is if you think of a photographer, and most photographers are very careful to make use of the best lighting to illuminate their subject most clearly. Sometimes they position themselves so that the natural lighting is best. Other times they actually set up their own lighting, and they take great pains to illuminate their subject so that their subject shows the best, so that their subject shows most clearly. And an active echolocator is able to do exactly that with their signal, instead of just sort of making do with whatever signals happen to be available in the environment. So many active echolocators, if you look at the research, they tend to use sharp, short signals. A tongue click is a good example of that. So I've been clicking since I was probably about a year old, maybe a little older. It is a sound that very young children can learn to make, usually pretty easily. And I tend to model it and young children tend to eventually copy it. But there are two ways to address that. So I could do just a workshop on clicking alone, but I won't do that. I'm just going to touch on a few points. So if you have children, adults or children older than, say, age 8, just depends on how mature your child is, you can actually start to show them how to make a tongue click if they're not able to make them. And generally about 75% of our students are able to make a tongue click, usually pretty quickly, pretty easily, without much training, really. But if we think about it, a tongue click, there are two types. There's one that comes from the back of the tongue. So it comes from the kind of back of the throat, and it's actually called an alveolar click because of where it strikes the roof of the mouth in the alveolar region. And then the type of click that I personally use is more forward, and the tongue is affecting the palate, and so it's actually called the palatal click, which is right behind the top teeth. So the alveolar click is more common than the palatal click, and it is the click that most people will use if they use a tongue click. The closest, it's called an implosive sound. So a tongue click is, you're essentially creating a vacuum, and that's what creates the sound. An explosive would be k, so like a K sound or a G sound. Or ng, so as in gong or kong or king, King Kong. So the word King Kong actually places the tongue in about the right position to create a palatal click. An alveolar click, a rearward click. And when producing these clicks, you want to smile. I often tell people to smile because that brightens up the click and it directs more of the energy out of the mouth. I also call it my smile meter. I can tell if you're smiling by your clicking. So sometimes I'll just actually have people say King Kong, and then I'll have them keep the tip of their tongue up at the roof of their mouth behind their top teeth. King Kong, King Kong, King Kong. And so that actually, for many students, positions their tongue in the right place to make the right clicking sound. What some students will do when they first click is they'll do this sort of cluck click. And what that really is, you guys get to see my tongue in sharp relief here. So the tip of the tongue is striking the bottom of the mouth, and you don't want that. You don't want the double click. The double click will actually interfere with the echolocation process. You need to sharpen up that click and get rid of that secondary tongue striking the bottom of the mouth click. So keeping the tongue up, King Kong, King Kong, okay? Now, another way to help students do this is with a spoon. And I often try to get the students to do this themselves. I don't like poking around in their mouths with a spoon. But basically, if you just rest the spoon gently beneath the tip of the tongue, and then when they click, the tip of the tongue cannot fall. It can't fall past the spoon. So it sort of helps the student to be aware of their tongue, where it is in their mouth, and it helps to train the tip of the tongue to stay up. And believe it or not, this works. And I often keep a spoon, and sometimes the student just needs a reminder. So King Kong works for the alveolar click. Church, or judge, those kinds of sounds work for the palatal click if that's what a student is more inclined to use. I don't try to get them to use one or the other. I try to see which one they're more inclined to use and then train it to sharpen it up if necessary. And it's only necessary for about roughly 25% of students. So similar to the King Kong exercise, the powerful click would be more like a G, and that sort of puts the tongue in about the right place for the powerful click to happen. I didn't go through any of this when I was a baby. I just sort of figured it out. And most babies who are inclined to learn echolocation do it that way. Oh, you could also use, I got these, I keep these from airlines. You could also use a butter knife, you know, something that's not sharp, obviously. Okay, an alternative to the tongue click though, and I alluded to this in part 1, are these castanets. And these, I am surprised at how many students actually like using these. They just sort of do like using these. I have put a link up and you can find out exactly which castanet, not all castanets are created equal. This is a Suzuki wooden castanet. These are the best ones, I think. I've compared dozens of them and these resonate the best. What's nice about these is you can make the click very quietly or very loudly, right? You can keep it on your thumb if you want, and then if you need to use your hand for something, oops, you can just put it back behind your thumb, and then you have your hands, and then back on your thumb, and you know you can use it that way. What some students like to do is they like to actually put it on their cane, like so. You can tighten this loop as tight as you want it to be, but this is a little bit loose on my cane. But basically, it's a bit like this, and then you're using your cane, and you easily have access to the clicker with your cane, and then it's out of the way when you're not using it. So that's one thing that some students like. Other things that you can do with these clickers, they're very versatile. So I've been surprised at how many. I mean, we've given out dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of these. We almost can't keep them in stock, or well, in stock, I guess, in stock. Let's see. You can also use like these things. So you can put this in the back of the loop, not the loop, but the string. And then you can stick this on a pocket, for example, like this. And then the student can just do this, and it reels out, okay? Or if they don't like the reel for some reason, you can just put a non-reely, a non-automatic reel clicker on there instead, and those might look like this. You get these from the stationery store. And it would be the same kind of deal. Oops, I need 3 hands. Let me just... Okay, I think I want it this way, yeah. So you just stick the tab in behind the loop like this. I know I'm not doing descriptive audio very well. Basically, there's a little bit of a loop that this clicker goes behind. And then, again, you can just put it on your pocket. And you don't necessarily need to pull the clicker and get it front and center. I mean, that's ideal if it's in kind of the center of your body. But even this, you know, you kind of want no fuss, no muss, really. So with a very young child, sometimes all you do is attach it to their clothing, and they'll usually just start using it automatically. And if they don't have to futz and fiddle with it very much, so much the better. But when they're a little bit more mature and they're able to get it more centered to their body, that's better. And what's also nice about these, and it's something you can't do with a tongue click, is you can scan it all around you. I can click behind me, I can click toward the ground, I can click up over my head, and all of those positions actually do give you different information. So, you know, there are even some advantages to using a handheld clicker.
Daniel,
okay.
May I
Yes.
ask a quick question about the
Yes.
castanets? Do you
Sure.
have a link or a place that you that it comes to mind that you like getting those from?
I sent some information about the cane, and in that should be some information about the clicker from when I gave the very first presentation in June. And if you don't have,
look then.
Yeah, and if you don't have that, I can resend it. But yes, it should be up on a page somewhere.
And because Leanne is so quick, Leanne has just gone and snagged that link from the previous presentation. And it is
all right. It takes a village.
Right
it
now.
takes a village. It takes a village. They're often available just off Amazon. But if you can't find them on Amazon, Suzuki Musical Instruments Corporation will have them. Okay. So with echolocation. So now that you're clicking, and now that you're producing a signal, and now that you're getting information back from your environment, how do we actually train people to do this? There is a video called Basic Activities that kind of illustrates what some of these exercises would look like in the field. But basically, there are 4 steps to stimulus discrimination. Anytime you're teaching perceptual development, what you're really doing is you're teaching discriminating a stimulus from its background or stimuli from its background. You can think of this visually. When you're looking at something, you're almost invariably looking at it against a background of some kind. And those of you who know about contrast, color contrast, the poorer the contrast, the harder it is to discriminate a stimulus from its background, right? And the same is true with echolocation. The poorer the contrast, the less reflective is a surface or a target, the harder it may be to distinguish it or discriminate it from its background. So there are 4 components to that program of teaching people to do so. And by the way, this is true for touch as well. So whether you're doing it with touch, you know, through the hands or feet or cane, these 4 elements are essentially the same. And the first is sensitization. What is it like to sense the stimulus? How do we sense it? What does it feel like? What does it sound like? So the very first time you present someone with a target, this is a photo. I don't even remember what it's a photo of, to be honest. Panels, you can use flat panels, you can use dinner plates, you can use, I tend to like to use transparent panels. So pieces of maybe a storage container lid or something, just in case the student has a bit of maybe a little bit of light perception. And you want them to be able to detect if the panel is present or absent, or where the panel is relative to your head. And you want the student to be able to reach out and touch the panel, because that connects the perceptual system with the movement system. Directed reaching, a very important developmental milestone, arguably often missed by blind children. I'm here to tell you it can be easily recaptured. But what if the student you're working with doesn't detect the target? So you're looking for sensitization. If they don't detect it, they can't sense it, right? So you want them to be sensitive to the stimulus, that you want them to understand what it is they're listening for. And so I would say you need to create, or establish rather, that initial hook stimulus. You need to hook the brain to attend to the right stimuli. If they cannot detect the panel here, then you kind of go to you use a strategy called stimulus intensification or clarification. Basically, you need to clarify the stimulus. And one way of doing it is to find a bigger panel, a bigger flat panel, okay? But, and that's a good way. I just don't happen to have one on hand. But what I do have on hand is a salad bowl. So if they can't detect this in front of their face, or to the right of them, or to the left of them, they will detect this in front of their face, or to the right of them, or to the left of them, because they'll sound like Darth Vader when they talk. But even if they're clicking, which is what we would normally do, we would click, they can almost hear something like this. Like, you know, a big salad bowl, a big mixing bowl, a big 5-gallon bucket. I mean, they're going to hear this. And what's interesting is if they couldn't hear this, I usually start with a lighter stimulus before moving to the heavier stimulus. I don't assume that they won't be able to hear the stimulus unless I use the heavier stimulus. I start lighter and then move heavier, and then I go back to lighter. There's a sort of special instructional technique that I prefer in doing it that way. And they will almost, once they can hear this, they will almost always be able to hear this when you go back to using the flat panel. So if they couldn't hear, once they're hearing the salad bowl, you go back to the flat panel and they can hear that. So that's stimulus clarification. Once you've done that, we don't spend a lot of time on, we sometimes call these panel exercises. We don't spend a lot of time on those. We spend a bit of time on those. But what is nice about those is over time, you can move to smaller and smaller and smaller panels, holding them further and further away from your student, always standing behind the student, never, well, rarely to the side or in front. It's usually presented from behind the student because you got to keep your body out of the way of the student. You also don't want your student facing into a wall or a corner or have a big overhang over their heads. You want to try and position your students so that they're sort of out in as much in the open as possible. And you can move to smaller and smaller panels. I've had some students be able to do panels as small as like a business card or a credit card, and they can detect where that is around them. Again, you know, when I do these workshops, they are often 1 or 2 day workshops, and we go into a lot of detail as to how all of this works and what all of this looks like. So another example of stimulus intensification or clarification is if you are trying to get them to find an open door, for example, and they're not hearing the open door, you look for a larger open door, right? So you've got, you know, this door, for example. If maybe they couldn't hear this door, then I think you can see part of my kitchen door. It's much wider. They might be able to hear a wider opening, or you can do what does the room sound like beyond the door? So this is just my bedroom, and it actually sounds quite sort of dull because I have a bed in here and I have other furniture in here. But if we use this door instead, and I'll be off camera for this, but I go into this room and it's much more echoey and much boomier, and they're much more likely to hear the open door of that room. And then when you go back to the other open door, they're magically able to hear it. So this is just, you're kind of tricking the nervous system into recognizing stimuli by doing a little bit of baiting and switching of the stimuli. The third element of stimulus discrimination is stimulus comparison. So you're doing an A-B comparison between types of stimuli. When I scope out environments to plan these echo exercises in, and again, the videos will show you these different kinds of environments. You're looking for environments that are quite rich in character, that have lots of different things in them, that you can play around with. Bushes, fences, trees of different sizes, buildings, walls. If you're in a park, there might be a pavilion. Parks are actually good environments. School campuses, especially university campuses, are often good environments to do these kinds of exercises in. And so you might say, you might find a hedge versus a fence. And you have the student listen to the hedge, and they're clicking at the hedge and then clicking at the fence, and then maybe spin them around or try to disorient them, and have them tell you the difference. Which one is the hedge, which one is the fence, or which one is the fence and which one is the wall, or which one is a tall wall and which one is a short wall, or which one is a large tree versus a small tree. I mean, you can do any kind of A-B comparison between stimuli to anchor the brain into the differences between the stimuli, and also the process of distinguishing one stimuli from another, one stimulus from another. And then the next is a bit subtler. It's what I call a stimulus association, or associative stimuli. So the one before it was stimulus comparison, where you had the two, or more, maybe more than two, actual stimuli directly and concretely available to the student. I might even say, you know, I want you to go into this grove of trees, and I want you to find me the three smallest ones in that grove. And I want you to do it just by listening, right? So you're clicking, you're listening, you're scanning, and they have to distinguish and find the smallest trees or the largest trees, right? Or the ones with the widest trunks, you know, that kind of thing. Well, with stimulus association, it's essentially stimulus comparison, but you're drawing upon memorized references or mental references or mental concepts. So for example, just to give one example, I might have a student clicking at a hedge, and maybe it's a dense hedge. And I might say, what do you think that is? And the student might say, well, sounds pretty dense. I think it's a wall. And then I might say, okay, so would you say it's as solid as the wall of your house? Maybe, or the wall to your classroom. And they might think about that, and they might say, no, I don't think it does sound that solid. It must be a fence. And I'll say, well, yeah, maybe it is. Does it sound kind of like the fence that goes around your garden, or the fence that goes around your schoolyard or whatever? And they'll think about it, and they'll say, no, it doesn't. It doesn't sound that sparse. It sounds more solid. So it's somewhere between a wall and a fence in terms of solidity. And then we might talk about that. Well, what other things do you remember experiencing that sound most like this? And that's kind of a pretty high order level of stimulus discrimination. But we reach this quickly. I mean, I often have students able to do this within a couple of days of training. Okay. So in the notes, I was going to cover some other stuff, but I'm going to skip past that, and I'm going to move around to some strategies for babies. So babies love mixing bowls. They love mixing bowls, and I just got these at Target. What baby wouldn't like all these nested mixing bowls? These are just wonderful. And these as well, I'm gonna put these cat toys over here. Oh, yeah, babies love mixing bowls and cat toys. They really do. Babies love cat toys for the same reason that cats love cat toys. Actually, I have to show you my collection of cat toys. This is very, very important. Absolutely. What baby wouldn't love this, okay? It even squeaks. And you just have to be careful because it has ears. Maybe you pull off the tail. You don't want the baby sticking it in their mouth. You know, cat toys are made for cats, not babies. But I'm here to tell you, blind babies love cat toys. They love these bells. They love serpents, okay? And they will be highly motivated to find. I actually added these 2 cat bells to the serpent. You can buy cat bells go to the pet store and just see what they have. You want really, really bright sounding bells. Cats love bright sounds. Babies love bright sounds. Blind babies love bright sounds. And these cat bells often make the brightest sounds, as do these serpents. But just be careful because, again, you don't want this going into kids' mouths. So I consider these to be more instructional toys to be used under supervision. You don't know where these were made. And yeah, you just don't want them in their mouths. But they are highly motivated and they do love these things. Now, so a couple different things about these is different sounds when you talk or make noises or sing songs into this versus this, right? Versus this, and then versus back to this. So which one do they prefer? Big, middle, small. Maybe they even like to name them, okay? Maybe they just like the sound of what they sound like when you bang them together, or the sound of this versus this. Okay, now what this is about, it is fun and games, yes, but it's also about drawing the child out of him or herself to want to motivate to interact with these things, okay? You find what floats their boat. What sound do they like to play with? Do they prefer the plastic? Do they prefer the sound of the bell in the plastic? Okay. And are they willing to look for it? So looking for it is you can play that game in a couple of ways. So what we do sometimes is we'll sing a song, and as we're singing, I might move the mixing bowl around the baby or young toddler. Okay, and then maybe the baby wants to reach for it, okay, because they want to play with it, because they've discovered that they have a really good game that they like to do with it, right? So they're willing to reach for the sound of it. Well, what I'll do sometimes is I'll stand behind the baby and I'll talk at the container, which is hanging somewhere in front of the baby. And so they have to go by the reflection of the bowl. Where is it? Where is the reflection? And are they willing to reach out and find it? And so whenever I present something to a blind baby, what I try to do is I try to present it with the biggest surface toward the baby, and I try to see if I can get them to reach for it. So I might bounce a sound off of the surface. I call it lighting up the surface, or encourage the baby to make a sound. Babies, my nephew was 6 months old when he learned to click, and he's not blind, but his uncle is, and he learned to click because he heard his uncle clicking all the time. So, but maybe the baby will make different sounds. And I do have some video of me playing around with babies using sounds like these, right? So the idea is this. It's developing the idea that the acoustic characteristics of an environment correspond to the nature of the environment. Metal sounds like metal. Big sounds like big. Smaller sounds like smaller, you know? And really starting to create those connections of interest using all these different kinds of games that you play with an infant. So that's just sort of a very crash course in sort of the auditory bit. The cane, so baby cane. So what I have here is I have taken a slimline cane like this that you can get from Ambutech. Ambutech sells child canes. You can get rigid or folding child canes just like this, but like knee high. You know, you can get the shortest one is 12 inches. Okay, you can get these already made, and that's perfectly fine. I would go rigid rather than folding. I tend to make my own just because I don't necessarily, when I meet a child for the first time, I like to make a determination of what cane they is best suited for them. And so I tend to make my own, and I'll just show you real quickly how I do that, but you can buy them sort of pre-made. I take plastic bag, put it over, put it over. I've cut the shock cord out. So I cut the plastic cord out, and I just basically do this. This is a produce bag from the store. I put it over the first joint, shove the second joint over that, and then I rip off. And then I won't do it now, but I take scissors and I snip that off. Obviously, you don't want that in a baby's mouth or anything. So you just snip that so that it's, and this is now quite strong. These joints are strong. This baby would have to be bam bam to pull these joints apart. See, it takes an adult. Yeah, you have to work at it to pull these apart, right? So that's why I do it that way, okay? And I'll just add one more joint. The nice thing about making your own is as the baby, you want this to be about half a gain or maybe even twice as long as a baby is. So some babies might be about that long. So we're just gonna make it this long. I'm gonna put another bag in, do this, like that, pull that down. Oh, you know what? Actually, okay, well, that's fine. So I don't bother to put a tip because the baby isn't walking yet. The baby will be walking, and when the baby does walk, we do want a tip for the baby, but we don't necessarily need one just yet. So the tip just adds weight to the cane. This is very, very, this might not even be long enough for some babies, but anyway, we'll use this. And remember, I snip all this.
To the camera.
Yep.
There's a couple of people that they're so interested in what you're doing and wondering what the two pieces were that you put together.
Okay, so this is a cane that I've cut the shock cord out of, and these are just the joints of the cane. And this is bag that I stuck into the joint so that it's a friction fit. It's basically a friction fit. You can see this is not going to come apart. Okay.
Okay.
And a baby's not going to pull this apart. So you see the bits of bag hanging off. You just snip that off or tear that off. The middle one almost has it all off. Does that make more sense?
Yes, this is a great closeness so that we can see those details.
Yeah, I'm actually going to be getting a better phone that'll have a more high def camera. So the demonstrations like this will be better. Okay, and then the baby's on the floor and they're feeling around with their cane and they're finding stuff. That is wonderful. That sounds absolutely wonderful. Or maybe you want them to find a bell on the floor and they find it and they go and get it, and then they find the bowl and they stick the bell in the bowl or whatever. And you are playing this game with the child. Now, here's the interesting bit about babies. Babies, especially blind babies, tend to be less interested in what you are doing and more interested in who you are. So when you're working with blind babies, especially when you're working with blind babies, they're attentive to you. They may not seem attentive to what you're doing. They may let you motor them through the process or whatever, and they may seem kind of half interested or not even very interested. But what's really going on here is they're trying to figure out who you are. And what I often find is, okay, kind of we sort of push the baby through and we push the baby through and they're like giving you, their attention, but not necessarily following through. Then what will happen is I'll step away and have a little chat with mom or dad about what we did and why we did it. And then the baby starts to do the activity that you were doing with them. They may take the initiative to do the activity that you were doing with them that they seemed half interested in. Well, you've just stepped away and now they're going to take interest in the activity. okay? So while we're interacting with the baby, they're often more interested in who we are. When we step away, they then become interested in what we were doing with them. Babies especially, and children in general, tend to have single channel attention. They tend to not multitask. Adults aren't as good at multitasking as they tend to think they are. Children definitely are not. A great way to distract a child is to get them singing or to get them into another task. That's a whole other thing. But that's what's going on here, you know, with blind babies. Another thing that blind babies tend to absolutely adore, and I don't have one here. I gave a lot of my stuff. I've given it to kids locally to borrow. There's a thing called a cricket ball. You guys in the UK will know about these, and they rattle just amazingly well. They're a big plastic, not big. They're about the size of a baseball, and they rattle fantastically. You can get them here in the States. You can get them from MaxiAids. I believe they're called hockey balls here in the States. But they have this wonderful rattling sound that sounds a bit like this. This is just a bottle that I pilfered, and then I stuck ball bearings into it. And it's a child-proof cap that probably means only children can get it open. But they love the sound of this rattly stuff. They love the cricket ball. I've never met a baby who didn't like the cricket ball. So you have to have one of those in your arsenal. Like I say, you can get it from MaxiAids. Or the RNIB, of course, if you're in the UK, right? So that's just a quick idea, a set of ideas of what I do with kids. And you can turn these into all kinds of games. You can do little scavenger hunts and hide and seek. I mean, you know, basically these kids, once they get into it, they can literally be entertained for hours. And you move more. If you think about it, the acoustic environment is applicable to lots of things. So a big container sounds big, and a little container sounds little. Like a big room sounds big, a little room sounds little. A big tree sounds big, a little tree sounds little. You know, this sounds a bit like a corner. So we might play hide and seek and see if we can go find the corner, or see if we can go find under the table. What does under the table sound like? So we do a lot of sort of talking about what things are and what things sound like, and start to create language around these experiences. So the more experiences we have, the more experiences we can kind of share with a baby or toddler, the more we can talk about, and the more they can start to ideate, start to really think about and expand upon these exercises. And so eventually you have kids actually reaching out for a sound. You know, if they hear you approaching with a bowl, they're reaching out for the bowl. Or they have their cane, that you try to keep their cane in their space. Just keep it in their space at all times. You don't have to force it on them, just keep it in their space. And it becomes a natural extension of their arm to start feeling around their surroundings with it to see what they can feel. And so that's why with babies, we really want the cane about at least half again, or maybe twice as long as they are, so that they have the opportunity to reach out, okay? Then, as the baby becomes a toddler, you would get them, I would get them a cane like this. These are the Swarovski canes, and there is a link, or information rather, as to where to get these. These are my favorite ones. They're available from the Czech Republic. They're the lightest, strongest. These are made of Kevlar graphite, and I think carbon fiber blend, so it's a composite. I had one of these for 6 years before I had to replace it. We've only had 4 students break theirs, and I think every last one of them slammed it in the car door. They're light, they feel rigid, even though they're folding, they feel very rigid. These joints are very well machined, and there's information on the website as to how to get these. I'm not gonna go into all the cane dynamics. I did that last lesson real quickly, but I tend to use a smaller tip. They call this a pear-shaped tip. We would call it a teardrop tip. The lighter the cane, the better. The lighter the tip, the better. I teach a special form of cane training that I call feather touch, which basically means that you can use a much lighter tip over any kind of terrain. Point is, Swarovski, it's called the Swarovski cane, they'll custom make it to any length. So if you have a toddler, the cane needs to be about as long as they are tall. It doesn't have to be longer than that, but about as long as they are tall. And they will make it to the size of the toddler, okay? So obviously this is longer than a toddler, but they'll make it to the size of the toddler. And if your toddler is 2, 3, 4, 5, here's the thing. If we can get these little kids using canes earlier, early cane training, they learn to walk sooner and they learn to walk with more stability. They are more secure in their environment. Pardon me. They're more secure in their environment. The cane acts as a third point of perception. Even though they're not technically using it for balance, they're not using it like a shepherd's staff, they're using it like a blind shaft, okay? But this cane, the tip on the floor of this cane serves the same function as vision for contributing to balance. Vision does contribute to balance. It isn't balance. The vestibular system is all about balance, but vision does contribute to balance. And so the cane serves as a third point of perception that contributes to balance. That's why we want these young blind kids having access to canes and feeling comfortable using their canes when they're little. You know, even if they are being supported, even if they are being guided around, you know, that's fine. I'll get to that in a moment. I'll get to that. But you don't want that in lieu of the child's own physical stability. There's no reason to have it instead of, so you can have both. You can have a blind child who's physically stable, able to balance, able to walk, and either, you know, use their cane or be guided or both. Okay, so that's a toddler. I'm gonna try and talk more about guiding later before I finish, but I may not get to it. What I do want to say about it though is I think we have it wrong as a profession. For as much as blind people tend to use sighted guide, and in the States we call it human guide, for as much as blind people tend to use human guide, especially blind children, and for much as, quite frankly, society expects blind people to use human guide, that's all very well and good, but we need to rethink as a profession how to encourage the use of human guide in a manner that not only preserves, but enhances a blind person's self-determination and enhances a blind person's freedom of achievement. And that'll be my carrot. I'll dangle that in front of you and I'll try to get to it before we're done, because the next exciting bit that I want to get to is, so you have a blind toddler, they're 2, they're 3, they're 4, they're 5, they're growing like a weed. You've ordered, you know, how many canes from Swarovski? 3, 4, 5 canes as they've grown. And please, I can't tell you how often I've seen this. The cane has to grow with the child. How many canes have I seen the blind child grow out of? We haven't bothered replacing it because somehow it just isn't the high priority. We replace their shoes, but we don't replace their cane. And so as the child grows, their cane really needs to be replaced. And so I will often oversize the cane. I will often make the cane even longer than the child is tall, knowing full well that the child will take a year or 2 or 3 to grow into that cane. And if it is too long, there's nothing to say that the child can't hold the cane further up the shaft. So they don't have to hold the cane on the handle, on the grip. They can hold the cane below the grip if they want. And in fact, many blind children don't mind doing that at all. And then as they grow taller, they can move their grip further up the grip of the cane or the handle of the cane. And so I said earlier, it doesn't have to be longer than they are tall, but I misspoke. I often over order because I know full well that the cane won't be replaced when the child grows, okay? And so I generally err on the side of length, on the side of too long versus too short. Okay, but now the child has reached, say, 5 years old, 6 years old. Swarovski has I'm gonna put this away. Swarovski makes a cane just like the one you saw. It's exactly like the one you saw. This is a little long maybe for a 6 or 7 year old. This would be more like an 8 or 9 year old. But let's just say the child's turned 5 or 6. They have a version shorter. They have one shorter than this. It's about, I don't know, maybe 20 centimeters shorter. So it comes up to more 6-year-old height, okay? But what's cool about this is they can use this just exactly like the cane I showed you, except it has an extendable joint that will go, I believe that's 15 centimeters, maybe more, okay? So it will increase the length of the cane as the child grows. So it will go from here, this is me, up to here, okay? That will cover several years' growth for most children. And so these canes are usually very, very sturdy. They often don't need to be replaced. You might not need to replace this cane in the hands of a child if you have the extendable joint here. So I didn't used to go for these. I do now go for these. I didn't used to go for these because they are slightly heavier, but the weight is not at the tip. The weight is in the handle. So the cane is actually quite well balanced. Even though it's technically a little bit heavier, it remains well balanced. And the kids tend to think it's really cool that it extends. So kids who are reluctant to use their canes or whatever are less reluctant to use these. Plus, it grows with them. And then when they turn maybe 12, you switch it out for the next one. Actually, I think this one's too long. Yeah, this one's too long. So this would be probably a pretty tall 12-year-old, but that's as long as that gets, right? So for many kids, they may only need 2 Swarovski canes growing up. You give one to them, like this one maybe, when they're 6, and then when they get to maybe 10 or 11 or 12, depending on, the child's growth trajectory, you switch it out for the next longer one, and that one will probably do them until they're full grown. I mean, this cane actually is longer than I personally use. This one goes longer than, I think it's 160 centimeters. It goes longer than I would personally use. So I'm pretty sure I included information on this particular cane. In fact, I wrote all this out in the cane stuff that I sent, just for reminders for people. And this is pretty much what all of our students are using. Okay, so let me just. One notification. Okay, so I'm going to try and get 2 more things in. I will talk a bit about the guiding. I'm going to wax heretical for a moment and say a couple things. I spoke last in part 1 about the need for self-determination and freedom, about the fact that we tend to expect children, especially, to take the guide that they're told to take, and where they're told to take it, and how they're told to take it. We don't actually give them the opportunity not only to make a lot of their own choices about who's going to guide them, where and when and how, but also about how to manage their own supports, how to engage their own guide, how to engage the people who would be guiding them. It's usually that person's assigned to them. I won't go into details about that because I've already done it. But the other thing, but I want to say that it's extremely important that these kids develop that ability to engage their own and kind of manage their own supports. One thing I want to say about that, though, is the standard way of teaching guide. You're holding onto the elbow and you're, half a step back or whatever. So you're behind the person. Now, when you're kids, maybe it's not such a big deal, but here's the thing with adults. What I find is that really drives a wedge between you and every social encounter you have. So let's take the airport, for example. It's a good example because I traveled through many, many, many airports and train stations and stuff. And here's what tends to happen in airports, train stations, and transit stations, and just general public. First of all, that person either has never guided a blind person, or maybe they did once. Who knows how long ago, right? So they don't really know what they're doing. They're uncomfortable, and they're a lot more self-conscious about it than I am, right? So they're walking ahead of me. Now, the very positioning of me relative to that person gives that person essentially a social advantage. When in all of the things that we encounter, whether it's getting my ticket, it's getting my boarding pass, it's showing my passport, it's all of these things, I have to fight past the guide every single time to essentially be engaged as a real person. Okay, and I'm one of those people who doesn't like that. So I find I tend to walk up beside the guide all the time. Okay, and if I'm walking up beside the guide all the time, it's often more comfortable to take the guide's shoulder than the elbow. Or if you're in Asian culture, quite frankly, they will often grab my arm, and that puts me either beside them or a little bit ahead of them. I may or may not correct that. I may or may not care. The reality is, A, they're usually more comfortable with it that way, but B, they may not even speak enough English for me to explain to them what it is we're trying to do. And so we basically just want to get through the experience smoothly. Here's my point, and this is how I found this out. Because when you're walking half a step or so behind your guide, you're out of the social bubble, okay? So you've got to somehow shove yourself past or project yourself past this social bubble because you're behind the person that's in front of you. But the other thing that's true is you are out of the visual field of your guide, who, let's remind ourselves, hasn't really been trained to guide a blind person. That's when you get run into everything, okay? Unless you've got your cane with you, which in principle, I prefer to have my cane with me when I'm guided, but in practicality, I'm probably schlepping luggage. So I probably don't necessarily have my cane with me, and I have juggling documents in my hands and stuff. So, if someone takes my arm, that means I have a hand free to deal with my own documents and so forth, right? It's practicalities here that we want to rethink a little bit or a lot when it comes to guiding. If you're a step behind your guide or half a step, unless your guide is specially trained, a mobility specialist or a blindness specialist, or maybe a parent, they're not sure how to track you. And so you're a little bit on your own back here, okay? And I'm here to tell you that if you are up either alongside your guide or even a little bit ahead of your guide, you're in their visual field, they relax. They relax a lot when you're there and they can see you, and it's much easier for them to accommodate your whereabouts relative to the rest of the environment. And that includes things like steps. Everyone's concerned, well, if you're ahead of your guide, what if you fall down the steps, or what if you trip over a step or whatever? Somehow that doesn't happen. It doesn't happen because your guide can see you and doesn't let that happen. And yes, they can be distracted. I won't say it's never happened. Well, actually, to me, it's never happened. I won't say that it couldn't ever happen, but I'm here to tell you the things that, you know, I've been run into with a guide is just lots and lots. So it's something for us to think about. What kids, the reason I bring this up here relative to kids is kids, if we leave them to their own devices and we don't horn in, boys will tend to take a shoulder. They'll tend to rest a hand on a shoulder, or their friend will rest their hand on their blind friend's shoulder. It'll be one or the other. Okay, it's a shoulder thing. It feels more masculine. It feels more boyish. Okay, there's something about the arm that boys don't like, especially when they get past the age of like 10. All right, so I'm all for it. I have no problem with it. In fact, you know, when the subject comes up of their friends not really wanting to guide their friends around, I'll sometimes say, you know what, some kids just take a shoulder. It just feels more natural. And when you take a shoulder, you tend to be up on your guide. You tend to be walking beside them rather than behind them. That this is a little bit uncomfortable. This is a lot more comfortable. So my arms stretched out the whole time I'm behind my guide. This is actually a bit more comfortable where I'm walking beside my guide. Girls will tend to hold hands. And again, same thing. You tend to walk beside each other when you're holding hands. When girls are holding hands, you know, or maybe a mom and a young kid are holding hands, you're not necessarily walking behind, you're walking beside. And that presents, I'm just going to say, it presents a stronger sense of social equality, and therefore, I would argue, a stronger sense of inclusion. Okay, so I'm putting it out there. I actually have a whole program about guiding and sighted guide and social engagement and what that all means. And it is actually spelled out in the Echolocation and FlashSonar textbook. Now, speaking of social engagement, I know I'm rip-roaring through all of this stuff, but here's something to think about when it comes to social engagement for blind kids. And we all do this, and we've all done this, and I've been guilty of this too, is we give the blind kids a pass. We tend to give the blind kids a pass for not looking at you, for not facing you. Their head is down, their head is swiveling, they're looking off who knows where, you know, but we know who they're talking to, and they know who we're talking to. And so we just kind of, you know, we kind of let that pass. So what I do a couple things. One, I try to teach social engagement. I try to teach, you know, pointing the head. I know we've all been there, we've all tried. Because if you can engage your social environment more effectively, then you can engage your physical environment more effectively. You're directing your attention to where you want it to go. You're directing your attention to where you want your attention to pay off, where you want your attention to make an impact. So it's pretty simple. I will do two things. One is I will tend to withhold my attention from a blind child until they have done the work they need to do to engage it. Now, what do they need to do to engage my attention? Pretty much the same thing that a sighted child does to engage attention. You orient your attention by head motion, by head movement, okay? So with a sighted child, it's eyes up here. With a sighted child, it's look at me. I need to see where your attention is going. You have to face me, okay? If you're not facing me, I have no idea. You're talking to the floor. I have no idea who you're talking to. I have no idea whose attention you're trying to get. So you got to be facing me, and your body has to go still, reasonably still, okay? I mean, it's not healthy for kids to be still all the time. It's actually not a good idea, but I at least need to know that you want my attention. So if you're wriggling and fidgeting too much, I'm not really sure what you're about. I need you to be looking at me, facing me, that way I know. And what's really interesting is if the child is kind of mature, you can sit down and have this conversation with them. And I've had chronic head swivelers, chronic head swivelers, and they're swiveling their heads. Well, guess what? When you teach them echolocation, they stop swiveling their heads. when they're directing their attention to various aspects of their physical environment, I'm here to tell you that head swiveling stops for at least that period, okay? So we want that to be the same with social engagement. So we play a game, and we'll talk about why, we'll talk about what it means, we'll talk about this sort of magnetic interaction between people when they face each other. Kids know when you're facing them. These blind kids know when you're facing them, and these blind kids know when your head is swiveling back and forth. And so sometimes I'll have a conversation with them with my head swiveling back and forth, and it drives them nuts. They don't like it. So we play that game a little bit, and we basically say, look, you have my attention because I'm directing my attention at you. And then when your mom says something, she draws my attention to her. I turn to face your mom, so she knows she has my attention. That's how people know. And this was an 8-year-old. I have it in mind right now. We were sitting at the table. He was like I said, he was a head swiveler, and he just completely bought into this. He thought it was the most interesting thing ever. And there were times when someone would say something and my voice would shift, and then he'd point out, right, that I'm now looking at them, and he could hear where my voice was turning. So part of the issue here is holding our kids accountable, and for how they're directing their attention. And I think it's really important. I know we've all tried. Nagging does not help. But yesterday, one of the things I said, need drives learning. If the child needs my attention, they will learn to do what they need to do to get my attention. If the child needs a parent's attention, most of these blind kids love to converse, okay? They love it. They love it. They want your attention. They want that social engagement. They want to know who you are. They want to know where you are. They want to know what you're doing. And they want to know you. And they do it through conversation. But they've got to do the work to get my conversation, to get their parents' conversation. And they usually learn to do it, okay? If your kid has some, social communication challenges like autism, okay, this doesn't tend to work with autistic kids. They are the island. So it's a bit of a different situation with autistic kids, and that's its own workshop. But for most kids, it tends to work well. Now, I had to think backwards and reverse engineer this a little bit, because I was encountering a lot of blind adults. Yes, I work mostly with blind kids, but I've also worked with blind adults who are trying to get someone's attention. We've all been here too. They're trying to get someone's attention. Maybe it's at a public service counter. Maybe it's on a train platform. They're trying to find out if this is the right platform. They're trying to get someone's attention, and they just can't seem to. Well, it's often because they're not doing the work. They're not looking where they need to be looking. They're not directing their attention. They're not extending their attention to the person they're trying to get attention from, right? So, so it starts to become a functionally very critical issue if these kids can't engage socially. So anyway, I wanted to throw that out there because this is a paradigm that I found useful for a lot of kids. It has occasionally backfired, but for the most part, it works out well. Okay, the last thing I want to get to, and I will actually have time to do it, is hand-to-hand referencing. So self-help skills. And this is also true for sports, but let's think of it in terms of self-help skills. And we're often talking about things like eating, brushing teeth, zippers, fasteners, things like that. I realize I'm preaching to the choir for some of you, but but not all of you. So let's think of this in terms of visually, sighted folks, conscious or not, they're watching their hands, and they're watching how their hands interact with each other. For blind kids, of course you have proprioception. So, I know where my hands are in space. Yes, 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 and yes. But that extra added sense of the hands communicating with each other, it really drives the point home in terms of how these hands can interact, okay? So for one example, let's do zippers. I'm gonna do zippers, brushing teeth, and eating, okay? So zippers, this happens to have a zipper. So with a sighted kid or sighted person, they just orient the tab into the zip. See, I'm blind, I can't do it. Okay, okay, I'm gonna cheat. Pretend that I didn't do just what I did. So visually, you'd be able to key into the slot here without much effort, okay? You just do it. As a blind person, my hands sort of have to talk to each other. I'm gonna exaggerate here, but my hands sort of have to talk to each other, right? So I've got the tab in one hand, I've got the, whatever the heck you call this, in the other, and my hands are guiding the process. Now, a lot of these blind kids do not do this naturally, and we don't necessarily teach it naturally. So when I'm teaching something like this, I make sure that the hands are in contact with each other. The hands are communicating with each other. You've got the stabilizer hand and the activator hand, okay? They need to talk to each other. In this case, this would be the stabilizing hand. This is the activator hand. It's bringing these two things together. And then, of course, voila, okay? I mean, so that's just an example. That's a zipper example. So another example is brushing teeth. It's a similar thing. So I'm not going to take the cap off this tube. Actually, this tube is mostly empty. But, you know, a sighted kid, I guess, I gather, they kind of hold the handle of the toothbrush kind of like this, and they bring the tube of toothpaste over, and they visually make the connection. And they just kind of go blip, and they have toothpaste on their toothbrush. That's how a sighted kid will do it. But that, I mean, I can kind of do it as a blind person, but that is not how I put toothpaste on a toothbrush. What I would do is I hold, so I actually have thumb and forefinger on both sides of the bristles. And I have my, well, so I kind of have one finger on the nozzle of the toothpaste, and I bring the nozzle basically between my, you know what, let me take this bit off so you can see better, sorry. Okay, that's better. So I bring the nozzle to the toothbrush, basically between my fingers. So that's where it starts, right between my fingers. And then I squeeze and move it across. My hands are sort of talking to each other. You can see that, okay? And so that idea, again, stabilizer hand, holding the toothbrush, activator hand, bringing the tube of toothpaste to the thing. Key going into a lock, same idea. I've seen a lot of, you know, blind kids flailing around with one hand trying to get the key into the lock, and they're just not making it, right? The one hand has to touch the lock. You bring the key to the hand that's touching the lock, and you insert the key into the lock. It may sound really fundamental. It may sound really rudimentary, but it's not. I mean, it is, but it doesn't necessarily occur to these kids naturally. I mean, it may, but it often doesn't. Okay, plate. Now, if I put this plate like here, like, can you actually see what I'm doing, or am I too far away from the camera?
It would be better if you were closer.
Yeah.
Okay, let's imagine that there's a table here. And if I were really clever, I'd have put a table here, but I didn't. So my arm's the table. All right. So you have a spoon, and, you know, we've all seen it. It can be carnage. You know, kids, spoons, plates, food, add blindness in there, and you might end up with more carnage, okay? So what I found is you know, if you have a hand holding a spoon, you don't necessarily have a clear sense of where your spoon is on the plate, where your spoon is relative to you, where your spoon is relative to food. It's almost like you're just in kind of empty space here. What I have found makes a huge difference, and I myself do this, okay, invisible table, is I will surreptitiously rest one hand on the edge of my plate. Well, I'm going to use that to support the plate in this case, okay? But pretend there's a table here, and my left hand, my stabilizer hand, is just resting on the edge of my plate. Now, I have an interaction between my activator hand holding the spoon and my stabilizer hand resting on the edge of the plate. I know where my spoon is relative to my hand at all times, even though I don't have to touch my hand exactly. It gives me a much better idea of where the spoon is on the plate because I've got a marker on the edge of the plate with my stabilizer hand, okay? So if you can get your kiddos to do just that one little simple thing, which isn't always necessarily simple, but if you can get them to do that, you will eliminate more than half the mess. You will revolutionize the eating process, okay? Hands together, I call it hand-to-hand referencing. It works well for just about everything. It's shoes and socks, tying shoes. I have a whole workshop for tying shoes. I don't have time to go into it now, but I have a whole way of tying shoes. It's almost foolproof that, you know, that the kids can learn to tie their shoes. I myself struggled with tying shoes, so I get the whole shoe tying thing. I was probably about 10 by the time I learned to tie my shoes. And I was really good with my hands. Like, I was really good at taking things apart and putting things together. I was a fantastic Braille reader. I could do lots of things with my hands. Shoe tying somehow just eluded me. So that's it. I did it. I did it. I got it all in.
Mission accomplished with so much information that you have given to us. Thank you. I can tell you, assure you that we have been very busy behind the scenes trying to capture questions that have been dropped in and keep up with those things. There's also been an outpouring of people sharing links with each other, different comments. And so we're trying to gather that information and condense it into a single document. Obviously, there are many, many, many questions that have poured in that we did not have an opportunity to get through. But just
I'll get to them. I'll get to them if you send them to me.
Absolutely. Just as for all of our attendees, just as we did for session 1, I will compile these, send this to you, Daniel, and we will get those answered. And perhaps a way that we can get these to you in a timely way is we're able to extract the attendee information and we can send an email out that way, just because it'll take time to get these answered, and you will receive a follow-up email to all the attendees that will try to include some of these links that people have shared in the chat. So just
I'm interested in those as well. That sounds good.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And stop